And I want to say welcome to all of you with our special guest from University of West Georgia in America, Christine Simmonds-Moore, professor at that department. I'm very glad you're with us. And your student Maya Baumeister also. And I suggest we just, you can introduce yourself and your research, and Maya will have some minutes for her part 2. And we'll see, we try to have a discussion, questions and answers. Sometimes we can need a break around perhaps 8:15, but we will see if we need that. It may be.
Okay.
There are many small topics we can touch upon, so we can often continue a very long time, but we'll see that. But I say welcome to you, and you can just start off, Christine.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to talk today about some of the research that we have been doing and will be doing at the University of West Georgia. So I'm Christine Simmonds-Moore. I've actually been here at the University of West Georgia for about 10 years now. Obviously not from America. I came from the University of Northampton, which is where I did my PhD with Chris Rowe. And I've also spent some time at the Rhine Research Centre. So I've had a long interest in parapsychology and exceptional experiences. And I just consider myself very fortunate to be able to teach and research into these really fascinating topics. So the title of the talk, and I added a little bit, Recent and Emerging Research at EWG, is Psychometry, Eco-Consciousness and Exceptional Experiences. So I'm going to say a little bit about the University of West Georgia and the new lab that we've set up here, a little bit about previous research, and then I'm going to be talking to you today about 2 of our new projects, Psychometry and Eco-Consciousness, and why we think those are interesting topics and how that relates into the general research program that we've been doing here. So, no, my computer's not letting me forward my slides, which is rather annoying. Let's see, technical issues, here we go. Right, so it's working now. This is, well, this is not the University of West Georgia, it's at the University of West Georgia. We are based in one of the oldest buildings on campus. It's Melson Hall. It dates back to 1907, which is very old for America. And within the building, we have a little lab, which is a neuroscience lab originally, but we've been using it a lot for research into consciousness and exceptional experiences. So I wanted to give you a sense for where I am. I'm actually sitting in the lab now giving this presentation, which is upstairs in Melson Hall. So the psychology department at West Georgia has a humanistic origin. And that has always overlapped with parapsychology. And the reason why I was attracted to work here was because Dr. Bill Roll was here, and he did a lot of his own research into exceptional experiences and hauntings and poltergeists, as you probably know. And so that's really the reason why when I saw the job advertised, I applied and was very excited about being able to do this work in a university environment. So I consider myself very, very fortunate. As you can see from the slide, this is a very unique department. We have a lot of art going on within the humanistic program, and parapsychology sits very well with its cousins, transpersonal psychology and humanistic psychology, and also critical psychology that are also going on here. So myself and Dr. Mitchell, David Mitchell, who's now at CIIS, decided that we would formally set up a research lab in 2020. So it was when everything was going a little bit strange in the world. But we set up this lab in, I think it was January 2020, as a sort of formal research center for doing this interesting work here. Although, as I said, I've been here 10 years. So some of the work I'll talk about briefly predates that time. But we wanted to set up a formal research center and really try to encourage more work and work on collaborations with students. And so we have master's students, PhD students, and undergraduates who are all interested in exceptional experiences. And the lab meets regularly to discuss interesting topics, and we're trying to start up some new projects. Previous projects have involved students as well. So I'll talk about the ghost study in a moment, but we have a current PhD student who worked closely with me on that project, plus a previous PhD student who's now a lecturer in his own right, also worked with me on prior projects. So before we dip in, and I know that I'm talking to people who are interested in these topics, but just to say, a lot of the focus is on the full range of exceptional experiences. So I really appreciate Belts and Facts approach, which is a bottom-up way of understanding experiences. So what do people actually experience on the ground? Whether it's real or not real is another question. So we are interested in the whole range of exceptional experiences. So experiences which are anomalies in the way in which reality is experienced. So anomalies in the self model, what's going on inside, anomalies that are happening out in the world model, so on the body and in the environment, including ghost type phenomena, dissociative phenomena, including out of body experiences and mediumship, and also coincidence phenomena, people's tendencies to find connections between different events that can seem psychic. So we are open to all explanations, but we really appreciate the value of looking at experiences from multiple perspectives. So as you can see from the slide as well, this kind of organizing framework includes all subjective paranormal phenomena. And really, we've been interested in all paranormal phenomena, and I've been interested in all paranormal phenomena since I started my PhD in Northampton with Christopher Rowe. I suppose a lot of my own work has focused on extrasensory perception in the first instance. And then when I worked at the Rhine Centre, I started doing more work with healing and psychokinesis, biological psychokinesis. And I stayed away from the survival question, but I received so many stories or questions from people after talks that I became more and more interested in those kind of questions as well. So ideas about, what is a ghost? Can information stay in a particular place? Can information connect to objects, particularly after a person has deceased? Those are all very fascinating questions to me and are becoming more pertinent in my own research agenda. And you'll see those emerging in some of my recent research, so the ghost study and then the psychometry study in particular. And we've also got more interested in trying to look at how people are having experiences in relation to the environment and to other people. So looking more at the idea of a system. And I'll come back to that when we talk about the eco-psychology project that we are going to be doing here as well. So this is hinted at from what I just said, that we are interested in all sorts of different levels of explanation with these experiences. So my own work is focused on state and trait correlates of experiences, subjective experiences, but also psi performance. So I'm interested in both. I'm interested in psychology and parapsychology with a view to further understanding the mind and consciousness. And this kind of approach can inform psychology and parapsychology, and they should be speaking more to each other, I think. But a lot of my work is focused on individual differences and how those individual differences interact with states of consciousness, for example, and circumstances. So a lot of my work has focused on boundary thinness and other variables that I would describe as being anomaly prone. I'm going to talk a little bit about synesthesia today and also introduce ASMR, which is something that really hasn't been looked at in the literature in parapsychology as yet, but we are looking at that in the context of psychometry, and it's very exciting. We've got some hot off the press results to share with you today, which I'm really excited about. So I use quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods approaches, and you'll see that represented in a lot of our projects and our ongoing and new projects as well. And also interested in meaning making and, how people make sense of their experiences. So oftentimes the research is looking at these correlates with statistics, but also looking at trying to unpack why are certain people having these experiences more than others, and how do they make sense of them, and what are they like? And those can give us some clues into what's going on with the bigger questions about ESP and the survival question and mind-matter interactions generally. So I'm interested in all of that. Yeah, so just basically how they can lend us clues into the nature of reality and consciousness. So this is a little snippet of some of the things that have been happening at West Georgia. This is not my whole research agenda because there's other things that predate my arrival here. Since I've been at West Georgia, I've really been focusing a lot of my work on synesthesia. So again, you'll see that echoed in our new project on psychometry. And so when I first came here, I brought a research grant with me that's a BL grant to study how synesthesia might relate to exceptional experiences. And so that was another mixed method study. So we had a survey and we did a precognition experiment. Also, as part of the experiment, at the end of the experiment, there was an in-depth interview. So again, different approaches to try and understand what might be going on here. And synesthesia is just something that really fascinates me and does seem to be very much associated with a range of exceptional experiences. I'll say more about that in a little bit. We also did some work looking at experiences that people have in the context of a sham God helmet. So I do actually have that because I'm in the lab. So this is our this is our sham God helmet that we adapted. It's a normal motorcycle helmet, and we essentially made it look like it had some interesting things going on, but really it's just a placebo. So we're really interested in people's experiences whilst they were wearing this helmet compared to when they weren't, and how paranormal belief and extreme skepticism interacted with that. Also, we were looking at time of day. So really sort of trying to unpack the recipe of exceptional experiences in these contexts. And so people would relax in, we have a chamber over there, that's just to my right, there's a sound attenuated, electromagnetically shielded chamber. And people would relax in that room and describe their experiences. And we were interested in those experiences as lived experiences, but also we looked at people's scores on a consciousness measure, the PCI, to see how consciousness changed according to the time of day and wearing a helmet. So that was really interesting. And most recently, we did the UWG ghost study. And I'm still writing that one up and making sense of that. But that was another BL study, again, consisting of a survey and an experiment. And within the experiment, we were very interested in doing interviews as well. So there's an interview in there too. So there's some pictures down below actually of that too. So the ones on the left that's Chase O'Gwyn. He was one of our PhD students who's now a professor at another university, modeling modeling the helmet and sitting in the chamber there. On the right hand side, we have the mirror setup for the ghost study. We did a psychomantium, so it's in the same chamber, psychomantium study where we had people engaging in mirror gazing, and we were exploring the various correlates of apparitional experiences that emerge in the context of mirror gazing, again, mysteriously enough, with a particular focus on synesthesia, and looking at how synesthetes might differ from non-synesthetes in terms of experiences and different correlates between experiences amongst synesthetes and non-synesthetes. So we were looking at random number generator output, geomagnetism, heart rate variability, anomalies on a camera, but also subjective experiences. So that was pretty interesting, and I will be sharing some of those results a little bit later. The introception study was also done in collaboration with Dr. Mitchell and Maya, who's here today. And so again, we did mixed methods with that. That was a survey, and we were interested in the body. So we've been trying to sort of look at exceptional experiences in different ways. And we've realized that even though psi experiences and psi itself correlates very strongly with, the physical system, there's very little discussion of the body in the research. So introception is how much we are listening to the body and how that might be involved in consciousness. So we looked at that and how it was related to mindfulness and to exceptional experiences. And again, we found that introception in particular was very, very connected to a range of exceptional experiences. I think it related to all of them. I think 6 there's 8 subscales of interoception, and we found that 6 out of the 8 related to the different exceptional experiences in slightly different ways, but really, really fascinating. On the left-hand side of the slide at the bottom, you might be wondering what that image is. Well, that is somebody's synesthesia. So I'll say a bit more about synesthesia in a little bit, but basically this is a time-space synesthete. And so what they are doing there is drawing what time is like for them. And there's different ways that people can be synesthetic. That's just one of the ways in which that can happen. And I have that a little bit myself. That's probably one of the reasons why I find synesthesia so fascinating. So that's a very short synopsis of some of the things we've been doing. We are doing some new things, and I didn't list everything because we've got a lot of ideas, and unfortunately not enough space and time and money to do everything that we want to do, but we're doing the best we can. And so on the list here, you've got 2 projects that are highlighted, and those are the ones I'm going to talk about more today. We're also doing an ESP and float study, and that is in collaboration with a local therapy center, and that's also that also has Maya as one of the research assistants on that project, as well as I think Paige, who else involved, Izzy, and Melissa. I think we've got lots of different people that are helping out with that project too. But yeah, so again, I mentioned that we're just getting interested in survival and information and space, and how human consciousness might interact with objects and the environment. And so I think these 2 projects that I'm going to talk about now are really looking at that, looking at people in relation with regard to psi experiences and psi performance as well. So this is the One Ring. And I think this is an interesting image because I think it symbolizes something of what we're talking about when I say the word psychometry. So psychometry is something that people have experienced throughout history, across different cultures, but the research is in fact very, very limited, which is very exciting to us in our group because it means that we can really contribute something new. There are a few studies out there. But going back, it's a definition. The definition is that it's a type of anomalous cognition. So it's ESP, which permits a psychic or sensitive to receive impressions using a physical object as an indicator or instrument for information. So the definition there that Para is using is about people trying to do this, people who are sort of adept. And that's where a lot of the research was focused in the earlier in the history of parapsychology. So I've got one citation there for Lashan, who did some work, I think with Eileen Garrett, the Irish medium. And so there's a few studies then. We've been trying to gather up all the prior research to see what has been done, but it's very much a handful, even though there's some research there. It is mostly with sensitives, and it's quite limited. There's a few studies more recently that have begun to look at how these experiences might happen in everyday people, or people who might not be mediums or practicing as psychics, but maybe consider themselves to be a little bit more sensitive, and people who are in the everyday population, in the general population. And so that started to happen. So Baker did a study in 2017. There's a couple of other para studies that have looked at that too, in people who are not necessarily practicing psychics. And I'm really interested in how experiences play out in everybody. So what is going on out there in the world with these experiences? And there is very little research that has looked at that. And in particular, again, with my interests on personality, individual differences, I'm not finding much in terms of how personality factors and other correlational factors might relate to psychometry experiences or psychometry performance. And in fact, I couldn't find much at all on psychometry experiences generally, and how people talk about their experiences, or, outside of whether it's real or not real, like what is happening. And so there's a big need really to look at this. And again, the One Ring is there because it has information and emotional information connected to it. So I feel like that is an interesting symbol for the study, even though it's sort of dark information. Psychometric experiences happen for both positive and negative information, actually. So it's accurate in some of that. So we went back to the literature, and again, I've mentioned that I'm interested in boundary thinness and connectivity. So a lot of my research, even dating back to my PhD, has focused on the idea of anomaly proneness. So who is more likely to have exceptional experiences anyway? And under which circumstances is somebody likely to have an exceptional experience? And a lot of the anomaly prone personalities do have shared characteristics. So we do see that people who have a lot of exceptional experiences tend to have very interconnected systems. So something like boundary thinness that's depicted on the slide, I think shows it quite well, that the way in which people are thinking and feeling and interacting with the world is much more connected. It's also about synesthesia. Like, people are much more likely to connect things together if they have an interconnected versus separate system. People are more likely to be more creative. You can see that as well. There's more of a kind of non-linear and fluid type of thinking in the thin bounded example compared to the thicker bounded example. And so you do see a lot of correlation between boundary thinness, transiminality, positive schizotypy, and related variables in terms of their tendencies to report both paranormal beliefs and subjective experiences. Now that's interesting. There's also enhanced plasticity that seems to be happening, which is healthy. This has been described more recently in the context of transiminality, and that's how transiminality is being described now as a sort of tendency to have a very plastic system. It's also about information crossing boundaries. So information is more available in a thinner boundaried system. And so information from your own body, information from your unconscious within the system. But if we're thinking outside of the system, there's more porosity to information from the environment, so more sensitivity, and perhaps more sensitivity to emotions from other people. There's just generally a tendency to experience more, so a permeability. There's also a tendency to experience more liminal states, so in between states of consciousness. The classic example is, of course, hypnagogia. As we're falling asleep, there's the in-between stage. That's in between wakefulness and sleep, very, very connected to psi experiences, in particular apparitions happening there. And there's more sort of associational thinking as well. So this kind of relates to the idea of more creativity. So this is what we're looking at with anomaly prone people who are sensitive and interconnected with themselves. So synesthesia is an interesting variable, and it does exhibit this tendency for greater interconnections in the way in which the brain is working and how the mind is working. It seems to be a feature of synesthesia that is happening behind the scenes. There is more connection. And even in the nature of the definition, so look here, synesthesia is where you've got an extra experience, an extra response, a concurrent response to an inducing stimulus. So you've got the usual stimulus and response, plus an additional concurrent response. So you can see that it's about connection just by looking at the definition. So yes, people who are synesthetes tend to have this extra way of experiencing the world. So synesthesia is comprised of two components, as indicated by the definition there, the inducer and the concurrent. And you've got a variety of different synesthesias that are possibly out there. Some people have synesthesia as a strong synesthesia. So basically they've always had this. They can remember having it from a very young age, and that happens in about 4% of the population. Other people can have sort of induced synesthesia or contextual synesthesia that seems to emerge in the context of altered states of consciousness, like meditation, hypnosis, hypnagogia, sensory deprivation. All of those have been associated with synesthesias that seem to emerge within that context, but not usually, not in the waking state. So that's quite interesting. Oh, psychedelic states too. That's another place where you see synesthesias emerging. And actually people who are synesthetes who take psychedelics can have additional synesthesias emerging in that state too, which I find fascinating. A third way is through neural damage. So some people have acquired synesthesia after brain damage, brain injury. And so it can be new ways of experiencing the world that can sometimes be very useful to the person. So that's just a brief definition of synesthesia. And just to give you more insight into what it's like, there are some quotes on the slide here from some strong synesthetes who have this as a way of being in the world. Daniel Tammet is particularly interesting. He's describing the number 9 there, and actually I stole the number 9 from his website. He has lots of his art on his website, and this is his number 9. Synesthesias are very, very specific, very idiosyncratic, they're automatic, and they're consistent. And so that's his number 9. So it's actually really useful to him because he can do mathematics more efficiently by using his synesthesia. So just to say that as well. And there's a couple of other examples on there too, just to show you how specific they are and how it's it can happen in multiple ways. It's an extra way of experiencing the world. And sometimes people have multiple synesthesias as well. I think the last one is quite interesting with the tube stations. And there's all sorts of interesting ones. People have lower level synesthesias that are sort of more perceptual like, and they can also have these higher level synesthesias. So for things like how you might organize genres of music can be synesthetic too. So this is going to come back round to the paranormal experiences, but I think it's about having an extra way of experiencing, and it's about having something as a perhaps concrete way of experiencing something that may not always be seen. So that's where we're moving to. Here are some common forms. You might be thinking that you might be synesthetic. You might be. Synesthesias aren't always, people aren't always aware that they've got synesthesia, is something I've discovered from doing this research as well, because it's just how they experience the world. But these are some of the most common ones on here. And again, you can see how idiosyncratic they are. For example, the number 8 there is very interesting. It's got a combination of blue and red, and that is that person's 8. It's very specific, and that is perceptual like, and they can do tests for people to see if it is a genuine synesthesia using the color that they have for the particular number, for example, if it's a number color synesthesia. Mirror touch is interesting because it's very much like empathy. Somebody who's mirror touch will have the experience that somebody else experiencing felt in their own body. So it's like empathy, but empathy plus. So it's felt as a physical pain in the body, and there are neurological differences in people who are mirror touch synesthetes, indicating that more is happening physically. So they are having more of a conscious experience of something that other people might have as just a moment of empathy. Time space, time is experienced spatially. And then we've got the higher level type at the bottom there, ordinal linguistic personification synesthesia. Again, just to illustrate the most common types, and that they can be very sort of perceptual, and some of them are very high level and very cognitive, how we organize the world. So that person there has got genders for numbers, and some people have personalities for objects, which is also something that is relevant to psychometry. So synesthesia and exceptional experiences, yeah, I've already told you that they're related, and I've been looking at this for a few years now. It does relate statistically with exceptional experiences, and that's experiences that are widely defined, so including things like I've had an out-of-body experience and tendencies for altered states, and things that are specifically parapsychological. So we looked at both types in that study, and we found, yep, it's related to both. We didn't find that synesthetes were more psychic than non-synesthetes on a precognition task, but we did find that associators, so synesthetes are different in terms of where the concurrent is. So some people have it in their mind's eye, some people have it in the sort of gut, and other people have it projected out as a sort of perception in space. Now, we found that associators did better at the precognition task, and we were using Daryl Bem's task as very much a kind of high level task. So, yeah, there might be something there. More research needs to be done. Another reason why we're doing what we're doing. We found some interesting patternings in the ghost study. So we found that among synesthetes only, there was an association between how much an apparition was felt to take up space and geomagnetism, sort of suggesting that the synesthetes are maybe having some kind of representation of the geomagnetism, or is the geomagnetism correlating with something else that the synesthetes are able to perceive? Something interesting. We also found that amongst synesthetes only, there was a correlation between how much an apparition was felt to take up space and the output from a random number generator. So again, what is going on? It's fascinating. It seems to suggest that there's some kind of interesting interaction with space going on. So again, we need to be looking at exceptional experiences beyond just the confines of an individual. We need to look at the person in relation to the environment and to objects and other people. So essentially what we're saying is that synesthesia could contribute to exceptional experiences, including psychometry, because they might be, well, exceptional experiences might be complicated synesthesias. So remember, synesthesia is inducer plus concurrent. There is evidence that synesthesia can occur without knowing you're perceiving it. So that's interesting. And there's lots of evidence outside of parapsychology for that. So it might be that inducing stimuli could be present but not seen, but the concurrent could still be experienced. And the concurrent, allows the synesthete to actually download the meaning and actually perceive the stimulus, and perhaps other people can't. So inducing stimuli could be a whole range of things. It could include emotions, personality. It could also include things like perceived spirituality with something like ASMR. It could include perceived beauty, also with something like ASMR. It could include health or ill health. Like some people who are practicing as healers will say that they see sort of colors in association with health versus illness. So it might be a different color in the body of the person they're working on that indicates health versus ill health. We've also got electricity and infrasound, geomagnetism there, the other unseens that could have a concrete label in the concurrent that is only perceivable if you have a certain way of being in the world. And this also includes ESP. So ESP information could be more available to the synesthetes. And so again, our research that I just talked to you about suggests that there are more anomalous interactions with the environment, perhaps amongst synesthetes, or more awareness of those interactions, perhaps. And so we were wondering whether that could also apply to information that is associated with objects. So psychometry, is the idea that you've got information from somebody who might be living or deceased, but information about that person is somehow connected to an object. And I'm pointing to my ring because we're actually using rings in our study. So we're going to be looking at that, how synesthesia might relate to the perception of information that's connected to objects. But we're also looking at ASMR because it just has been so neglected, and it just seems like this is an anomaly-prone personality type. So I've got a definition on the slide there. I can't see my definition. Let me hide myself. There we go. So ASMR is the experience of tingling sensations in the crown of the head in response to a range of audio-visual triggers, such as whispering, tapping, and hand movements. That's one definition. Other research suggests that it's oftentimes in response to emotional information. And so that's an interesting segue into the study as well. ASMR seems to be promising as an anomaly-prone personality because it's got some shared variants with other things that we know relate to exceptional experiences. So we've got enhanced prevalence rates of synesthesia, and some people even claim that it is a type of synesthesia. And I think if that's the case, and synesthesia is so rare, and ASMR seems to be something that's more common and even a trend in the world, that might be somewhere to look for participants who are much more available than people who are only 4% of the population. So I think that's interesting in itself. Openness to experience has correlated with psi experiences in the past. I think it's a correlate in Gansfeld studies that have found evidence for ESP. We talked about transliminality before, body consciousness, and unusual experiences. All of those things were found to relate to ASMR, excuse me, in a study by Roberts and colleagues in 2020. So as you can see, it's quite new, even outside of parapsychology, that it's even being looked at. But it's very timely that we start looking at this with regard to exceptional experiences at this time. Final point there is that it does seem to be more prevalent amongst people who are empathic, which makes sense. And that also suggests that this could be valuable for looking at psychometry. So in summary, I think for this part of the project, ASMR does seem to be synesthesia-like and often does seem to occur in response to emotional and social information. It's felt in the body. It also kind of brings things back to the body, which we've talked about before. Interoception, has been neglected. So we wondered, could this include emotional information and social information that is connected with objects, so in psychometry? So this is the study. We've done the survey component at the moment. We've finished that, and like I say, hot off the press findings that I will share with you in a moment. It was a mixed method survey in Qualtrics, and we included a question about synesthesia, the ASMR 15, which is a measure for ASMR. We included Irwin et al.'s survey of anomalous experiences. Excuse me, I'm gonna grab some water for a second. It's a good measure because it allows you to assess for tendencies to have exceptional experiences anyway, however you attribute them, and then to see how experiences are packaged up, essentially. So you can see whether people tend to label them as paranormal or not. Then we were looking at whether people reported having experienced psychometry. And then we asked people to say a little bit more about their experiences for a qualitative study. So that's the first part that we've been looking at just now. We are doing some future psi studies, and we have 5 target persons who are actually currently in the process of ring bearing. So we are continuing our reference to Lord of the Rings here. We have 5 ring bearers, including Maya, that's one of them. They're going to be wearing their rings for a 4-week period. We have some control rings that are matched exactly to the rings that are going to be lived. And those rings are going to be used in an object-based ESP studies, because we're doing an online version and a face-to-face version of that. That's the plan at the moment anyway. And then we're going to recruit participants who I think score high on ASMR in particular, to take part in an online and face-to-face study to look at whether they are better able to identify the lived ring compared to the non-lived ring. And that's it. And we're also looking at, whether there are personality attributes that correlate with a ring being a better target, basically. So we're doing some things with the ring bearers as well in terms of correlates. We've got different types of ring too, so we've got different materials. So we're also going to be just doing a very basic exploration into whether certain types of metal actually have an impact in psi. So that's that study. I don't know how I'm doing for time, because I know we've got a lot to say with 2 studies But here's our findings. We am very excited to say that ASMR is an anomaly-prone personality type. People who reported psychometry experiences scored significantly higher on ASMR than those who did not. And that's quite a nice finding, statistically significant. There was a small, significant positive correlation between synesthesia and psychometry. This was a very crude assessment because basically it was point by serial, yes, no versus yes, no, but it's something. There's something there, but it's not as strong as the ASMR finding, which I find quite interesting. Synesthetes scored higher than non-synesthetes on ASMR. So again, there's evidence here that we perhaps should be looking at ASMR as an interesting anomaly-prone variable. And we found that ASMR tendencies correlated with general tendencies to have experiences and paranormal experiences as well. Also, we found that experience proneness and tendencies to have paranormal experiences were significantly correlated with one another. So that's the quantitative results. We have some qualitative results too. I know this is quite tiny, and I know for time I won't say too much about them, but I can say a little bit. So we've got context or schema. So basically, psychometry is happening as a result of intention or spontaneously, but also, people have a particular knowledge or intention about the interaction with the object. So people might be collecting things from an antique shop or touching a gravestone, for example. Like somebody here said, I often purchase objects from thrift stores for that feeling. This often happens with antiques that are passed down. Going to a location that has a lot of history. So this is where it dovetails with ghost studies too, because a place is an object. So one person was talking about going to an abandoned mental asylum in Milledgeville and having experiences in that context. So there seems to be an organizing context. The imagery is experienced as a sort of flash. It's transient and passive. It's occurring in different senses, oftentimes visual. Next one, lived feelings and intense emotions. It's sudden emotion that seems to be felt by the people. And so sometimes it's happening in the body, so sort of embodied emotionality that they're feeling. And other times it's happening sort of outside in the environment. So people will talk about the presence of an energy. And so again, that can happen positively and negatively, which is really interesting. The next one is noesis, direct knowledge and information. So they are feeling like they are receiving information that's not them. It's from an external source. It's suddenly or directly received by the participant or recipient. And then they often talk about how that information was demonstrated to be accurate or have some kind of corroboration associated with it. And the final one is perspective taking, connection and empathy. So again, it does seem like empathy is playing a role here, which might give us some clues for future studies too. So an example is, the person is really feeling like they've got another person's view on the world. It's not them. It's a flash of someone else's perspective. And they say things like, I can get overwhelmed and can embody a personality or behavior of an object's previous owner. So it is a definite sense that they are having the experience of somebody who's not them, and it's very lived. So that, again, very briefly, because we have another study still to describe, but those are the 5 main themes that we're seeing in people's descriptions in the psychometry survey. Any questions so far?
No, not yet. I recognize so many of your ideas, so I find them really big variety.
Yeah.
And they're very recent. I mean, there are so many topics that are emerging as interesting, and you touch upon them, and I realize there are more connections, new ideas.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I really am.
I really find it sort of being the variety is very big, and that's really interesting. Connect new areas also.
Yes. Yeah, that's one of the things we're trying to do. We're trying to see things in different ways and, connect the dots in different ways, but really sort of going back to the older studies too, because, this is some of the research that was being done in the earlier days of psychical research and parapsychology. So we really need to not neglect that and go back to those earlier papers and shed some new light on them with what we know now.
Yeah, and I'm glad you have some emphasis on psychometry, because I have been fascinated by that, but I realize I see very few reports.
Yeah, I was quite surprised. I thought there would be more out there, but we've got a folder with everything we can find, and we've had to do some searching. But it's really, there's not a whole lot. And interestingly, psychometrics, the statistics that are applied to the development of surveys is influenced by psychometry. Actually, this kind of psychometry, psychic psychometry. So it's another place in which I suppose a mainstream thing has been influenced by psychical research and parapsychology. So we found that along the way too, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
So I have a quick question about synesthesia.
Yes.
Have you ever encountered someone that describes that their synesthesia evolves or develops and changes and gets stronger and such?
Well, I mean, with I suppose the psychedelics research has shown that people who have synesthesias can develop new ones in the context of that psychedelic moment. Oftentimes that's transient with the altered states, but there is one study that found that psychedelics were sort of permanently switching on a synesthesia in one participant. This is a case study with one. And the people that I spoke to in the earlier study, some people would break the mold, and they would say, people might have them emerging in the context of adolescence, which is a bit later. So it's happening in the context of hormones, I suppose, in that sense. I think people, again, that I've spoken to would say sometimes when they become aware of other synesthesias, they're noticing other ones. And then, maybe they're paying attention in different ways. So I don't know if that's new synesthesias or just like becoming aware that they might have more than they thought they had, just having the sort of language for them, perhaps. Yeah, but I think, there's a few people that are trying to create synesthesia or help people learn them. And hypnosis seems to be quite effective in training synesthesias. So that's another place where it might, if you can learn new associations. I think there is an interaction between having a sort of thin boundaried nervous system and being able to do that. It's almost like having a synesthetic potential. And then somebody who's wired like that might be more likely to develop new synesthesias through training or another altered state experience or something.
That's really interesting. The reason I'm asking is because I became aware of my own synesthesia well in my 20s, and when I noticed that when I started to focus on them, they just developed and it's grown into new shapes. Really interesting. Thank you.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, there's another study in itself, because that's so cool.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
I always love hearing about them. And then, if you go to a synesthesia conference, everybody's got synesthesia envy. Everybody wants everybody else's synesthesia. They're all so fascinating.
I can imagine.
Yeah. Well, if there's time, we would also like to share with you something of our other new project, which is about eco-psychology, or eco-consciousness, I suppose we're calling it. If I can get the computer to behave itself again. Here we go. Yeah. So yeah, I was fortunate to be part of the Jack Hunter collection, Greening the Paranormal, which came out a couple of years ago. I think that, hopefully that date's right. It's either 19 or 20. I think it's 19. You get lost in time in COVID. So I was talking about participatory eco-consciousness as part of that, of my chapter. And so again, it continues the same kind of ideas that we've been talking about, with the idea of connection, connectivity, interconnectivity being really important for understanding anomaly proneness. And so in this context, I was talking about the whole thing and psi as a system, I suppose. So somebody who's in a state of participatory eco-consciousness would have a system that is more connected with itself. So you'd have more fluidity in terms of the mind and the body, and you'd be more aware of your own mind and body, but you'd be more aware of your mind and body within context. So you'd also be more aware of other people. So it's about empathy and the environment as well. So sort of looking at connection, again, not just within the skin of an individual, but looking at psi as a system. And I don't think that's been done enough. I know we're seeing a lot more writing on, looking at entanglement as a way to understand psi, but this would be a way to look at that as a lived experience, to try and see whether people who might be more interconnected in various ways have more empathy and psi experiences. So I'm going to invite Maya to talk a little bit about the rest of this project, as she's working with me as part of our team on this project. So I'll hand over to Maya.
Hello, my name is Maya Baumeister, and I am Christine's graduate assistant, and I'm also a member of the Exceptional Experiences Research Lab. And my work centers around the intersection of parapsychology and eco-psychology. And so for our eco project that we are launching here, we are curious about how do different types of connectivity interrelate. So including transliminality and interoception as measures of intrapersonal connectivity, looking at empathy as a measure of interpersonal connectivity, and also looking at two different forms of connection with nature and the eco-psychological self as measures of environmental connectivity and an environmental self. Also looking at extrapersonal connectivity through performance on an ESP task. And another question we have here is whether or not we can actually cultivate these types of connectivity via the use of the plant wave. So I actually have the plant wave device here. It's a very special instrument, and the claim here is that the device measures different galvanic pressure gradients, so the fluid balance in the plant as well as the bioelectrical fluctuations within the plant, utilizing these electrodes. So you can clamp these sensors onto the leaf, or you can use these sticky pads onto two different leaves on the plant. And so the idea there is that they map these fluctuations as a wave that's then fed into the synthesizer and gives an output of a continuous stream of sound, so music in real time. And so curious here, how might this auditory feedback from an organism that before is simply silent, how might that affect or influence these measures of connectivity? And so I'm also using this device and some of these measures for my thesis work and exploring connectivity and nature-based healing modalities and interventions. However, the study that we're conducting and presenting on today includes two different components. So an online survey component and an experimental component. And so for our online survey, we're exploring how various measures of the connectivity interrelate. And so having 100 participants complete a battery of questions, including the MAIA, or Multidimensional Assessment of Interoceptive Awareness, to look at interoception. So Christine touched upon that awareness of the body and that intrapersonal connectivity, as well as the revised transliminality scale, looking at the interpersonal reactivity index for empathy and the different subscales for that. And then our two connections to the environment. So the nature inclusion scale, as well as the connectedness to nature scale. And so for our experimental component, we're going to explore whether listening to plant music via our plant wave device might increase scores on ESP, empathy, and environmental attitudes, utilizing 40 participants. And so we're still playing with some of the different designs for our ESP test. And in fact, yesterday, we did a trial of a forced choice clairvoyance test utilizing simple images from nature, much like Zener cards, in that they're distinct shapes that are different from one another. And we plan on trying out a couple more ESP tests and sort of decide from there, and are looking forward to getting started on this as soon as possible.
Thank you, Maya.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
And that's the end of our presentation. We have, I think, a minute for questions. A few minutes for questions. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And we want to also acknowledge the BL Foundation for funding some of the prior research that I've described, and the John B. Yorkheim Memorial Foundation for funding the new projects. So we're really excited to be able to do this. And any questions?
Okay, yes. Well, there may be many of them. I was a little curious about the connection with the plant.
Yeah.
I have just an association with plants having some kind of memory or intelligence. Have you come across that ideas from some researchers?
Yes. Yeah. And actually, we do have the is it Cleve Baxter collection at West Georgia. So we're really fortunate at West Georgia to have a fantastic archival collection that specializes in humanistic and parapsychological collection. So we have Cleve Baxter, and that was the focus of his work. And I think, Maya, you have been into the archives looking at that work, and so you might have more to say than I do about that. But his work was on plant consciousness, I think.
Yes, but I also noticed some research I came across in a television program last year, quite recent research during the last 5 or 7 years from European researchers about plants and trees having some kind of memory, learning capacity, intelligence even. And the question arises if this includes some kind of consciousness, which I come across in the research I've been doing for a book I'm working on. I mean, the concept of consciousness, might there be some kind of consciousness in trees and plants, also creating music or electricity perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, why not? I mean, if we, you know, because a lot of the inspiration for the project is also based on, you know, transpersonal experiences and mystical experiences, and people have those experiences in the context of nature, and those experiences are about being aware of something bigger than themselves and being in relation to something that feels like it's at least coming from the living source. So
Yeah.
I'd love to have those references too, because I know that particularly you, Maya, you might want to have some of that for your work as well.
Yes, I can send you the references.
Yeah.
Some Italian and French researcher, they only mentioned that these new organisms could have unfamiliar capacities. I mean, you don't really think of trees and plants as having memories and learning capacities, but they seem to have some kind of that. They interpreted the behavior as memory and learning, and then it perhaps indicates some kind of consciousness or intelligence. All these capacities are just for humans, but now they start to be used for trees and plants, and I'm quite surprised. And it just raises the question, what is consciousness? Is there any kind of consciousness in trees and plants and other organisms? I can send you the reference I found.
Yes, please. Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of things. I mean, we're going to be looking at the experience as well. I mean, I just think if somebody can get into relationship with the plant, whether it's got its own consciousness or not, but maybe it does, then that's going to boost the connectivity generally. I mean, there's already evidence that people who are in relationship with nature have better scores on empathy. So it's already promoting, good things, it's promoting well-being, it's promoting empathy. If it can do that, like whether the plant has consciousness or not, it's doing good. But I think that that might be part of the system, that there's, you know, it's different beings participating in this bigger system. Again, not just focusing on the individual as a boundaried object. The individual is in relation.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if you can see the chat, but we have a several step question there. Do you want me to read it, or do you?
Yeah, would you read it?
Yeah, this is from Jeanette Tellgren. Several questions. Is it most common that synesthesia involves vision in comparison with the other senses? Also, what do you think about Gary Nolan's finding that the caudet putum and striatum is more connected in those reporting encountering aliens? Is this perhaps related? Seems also Dean Radin and colleagues have correlates at the gene level for those experiencing ESP. Is the people that score high part of families with similar experiences?
Oh, yes. Well, there's a lot of questions there. First question. Yes, synesthesia oftentimes has color, so vision, as a concurrent. And the inducers are often sequences, symbols, meaning. So alphabets, numbers, days of the week, musical scales. But yeah, color features very, very highly. And the ones that I showed you on the screen as an example were the most common types of synesthesia. So they are often visual, but it's not the case that they're always visual. I think probably humans are, you know, we're dominated by our visual sense, but we do have other ways in which we can experience. And technically, any combination of senses and concepts could be a synesthesia. So there's argument in terms of how many synesthesias there are. I think, you know, there's at least 150 different ways in which we can have these fusions of experience, because it, you know, it can be like senses directly connecting, but it can also be these higher level ones and all sorts of combinations in between. Yeah, what was the next one? I don't know Gary Nolan's research about that. I would like to look into that. Do you know about that research, Maya? Aliens. Yeah, I don't know. I would like to look at that. I mean, yeah, I mean, any neural correlates of experience that are consistent are intriguing and lend some kind of clues into how these physical systems are interacting with experience or correlating with experience. I don't know what that tells us about beings, or I don't know, but I find that all very fascinating. And then the Dean Radin research, I'm fascinated by that idea. If we can highlight a genetic correlate for psi experiences, that would be intriguing. I think I have a copy of that paper somewhere. I haven't read it properly or thoroughly, so I'm not sure how that would overlap with some of the anomaly prone variables that I'm interested in. I would strongly suspect that it might, but I need to look at that in more detail.
Thank you. I have another question related to synesthesia. I personally would find it very interesting to be able to share my experiences and maybe take part of others' experiences and such. Is there somewhere you can do that?
Yeah, there's a American Synesthesia Association, and I think there's other associations around the world. And those conferences include experiencers and academics coming together. And those are really interesting. There's a few places to go. There's the Synesthesia Tree, which is a really good resource. It talks about all the different types of synesthesia. I'm not sure if it has a shared space for sharing experience though, which I agree is really valuable to do that. But that's a good place to go. She might have something on there. It's Pat Duffy, and she's a author and a synesthete herself, and she hosts this website called the Synesthesia Tree. If you want to just play with different types of synesthesia and see how many you have, you can go to the Synesthesia Battery, and it's an online test for synesthetes and researchers to look at synesthesia. You can do test retest and see which ones you actually have. So that's a place to discover more. But yeah, I think it really is interesting to share them. So maybe that's something that needs to be set up if it doesn't already exist.
Thank you. Cool. I will check that out.
Very good. Are there any other questions from our people listening here in Sweden?
Well, if you think of questions later, you are very welcome to email myself or Maya. I am csimmond@westga.edu. You can find me on the University of West Georgia website. Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody thinks of anything. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here today. I'd love to actually be physically there. I loved Sweden when I came. Maybe one day I can get over there again.
Yeah, we'll see. Okay.
I see. Yeah, thank you, Maya. Maya just put hers in the chat too. Thank you. And mine. Thank you, Maya. Yeah, so our email addresses are in the chat. Thanks to Maya.
Yes, and you can reach, if you send emails to me, I can send them further to you also. Very good. Okay, so I think we are just glad for all this information and many new ideas. I must say, very exciting with new approaches.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again for inviting us, and have a good evening. I know it's evening for you. We're in afternoon coffee time now. And I have one more class to teach. But
Okay.
yeah, nicer time travel today, and thank you very much.
Okay, very much.
Thank you.